What do I need to be good at to be great at something?
Hello, everyone. You are listening to SheLeads with Carly, and in this show, we talk to the absolute best, brightest, and yes, badass leaders.
Tap into where your natural curiosity takes you. Just making sure you're not your own roadblock. Even if you do fall, you're going to fall and you're going to learn.
Together, let's build a DNA of what it takes to rise to the top and truly make an impact. I'm your host, Carly Malatsky. I am incredibly excited to welcome Gaia Palliere to the show today. I feel like almost Emily in Paris trying to pronounce your French last name. But anyway, Gaia is currently a student and founder, and her background consists of product and growth strategy for companies like APL, Madison Square Garden, and now a few years into her first startup. Having lived in 4 different countries by the age of 7, Gaia has always been focused on interesting people and meaningful problems. Right now, her focus is on the single-use epidemic with her startup, Breeze, a tech company that helps food service businesses implement data-forward reusables. Gaia, so great to have you on the show. Welcome.
Thank you. Oh my God, it feels like I'm walking on a stage with an audience right now. I'm giving a speech.
Exactly. So first, set the scene for us. Where are you? Where are you in the world? What are you up to?
I'm currently based in New York City in a little studio apartment right now. Been here for about 2 years and happy to be here.
Nice. So I want to even start at that little tidbit I mentioned in your intro. 4 different countries by the age of 7. So take me to, little Gaia, two-year-old Gaia, if you will. But starting off traveling the world, and really, how that experience was. Where were you living?
I mean, I'd like to say that it was my decision to be so ambitious and, running around the world. I have to give that up to my parents. My parents met in Hong Kong. They had me and my brother, lived there for a few years, went to the Philippines, which was some of my favorite schooling years, interestingly enough. Preschool was incredible just by way of the food and the experiences, and the field trips were literally grappling waterfalls and things that, in the US, even just a, permission slip wouldn't slide, and in the regulations here. And then, in and out of France for a little bit, where my dad's side of the family was, and then moved to the US when I was about 6 or 7 years old, and then just moving around the States from there.
I guess at that young age, you probably don't even realize, there's so much change and shifting and things like that. Is that true, or was it almost hard to get up and go and make new friends and things like that?
I mean, it's a great question. I don't think that I was, when you're that young, you just kind of see everything going around you. You get into a car, you get into a plane, you're just somewhere new. You don't really realize, like, okay, now I'm on this center of the map. We're at this point of the map. And so I think it was really just kind of when I got a bit older that I realized, when people ask me, where are you from? Or like your story, or introduce yourself in class, or whatever it may be. And you kind of start telling your story, and people are like, that's kind of weird. That's kind of interesting, but like, why? Or I was always given like the army brat, like, were you a part of an army family? But yeah, I think it was mostly just understanding that it was different. And I think that, especially being in places where people spoke different languages, it was just a really interesting and beautiful thing.
Do you think that your mindset and approach almost to life today can be tied to that experience of seeing different cultures? Like, do you see that importance and the value in it now?
100%. I mean, in my personal relationships and my professional relationships, you always want to see the other person's perspective, whether you're building a product or whether you're in a fight with, a friend or whatever it is, or a family member. It's something that carries around so many different parts of your life. And it's something that I think up until the past 4 years that I really, really tried to hone in on what that means for intentionally using that skill or that just part of your mentality.
Yeah. And back then as well, what were you passionate about? What did you almost, when you asked the famous question, what do you want to be when you grow up? What was your answer?
Well, before I knew you had to go to college to do things and get a degree and do all of that, my 6 or 7 or 8-year-old brain was like, I'm going to do everything. I'm going to be an astronaut, and I'm going to be a singer, and I'm going to be an artist of some kind, or all these different things that and none of them was open to business, mind you, none of that.
Right.
But it was all these huge things that I wanted to do, and didn't realize you need like these insane math degrees or whatever to be able to obtain, just because it was, when you're at that age, it's just based on interest, right? Like, what is cool to you? So I wanted to be everything. And then obviously I'm one thing at a time.
I want to almost dive into one little thing you said, which is that, you didn't know that you had to go to college and had to get a degree. So right now I'm very much, what does our future look like? Right. And, how will universities change? In my mind, like, education could be it is a very, very slow moving in terms of innovation. But now that you've been to college, now that you are, professional, founder, everything that you've accomplished, do you still see the value in your college degree in a sense? Like, and it could very well be, yes, yeah, college is important. People still value that degree and that bachelor's. But how do you view that now?
I think, like everything, it's what you make of it. Like, if classes are varied by the curriculum, but the people who attend those classes are doing different things, or going through different things, or interested in different things, and it's up to you to kind of bring the pieces that you're learning together into this, connect the dots game of how it matters to you. So I think yes, to an extent, but the way that it's set up right now, I mean, before I went to college, I didn't want to go to college. Like, that was never in it for me. I think in every, country that I lived in, and I was in these communities where most of them had this plan of going to college. It was ingrained in the society that you had to go to college to do whatever it is that you wanted to do. And I think the pro of kind of being in between all of these communities and living in all these different worlds was that I didn't feel like I was so attached to, I don't know, the expectations of all these worlds. So I never had this pressure until I kind of got to the age where it was a real option for me. And I was like, could this be something? And I don't agree with you have to do 2 years of general education to then start learning what it is you might want to be doing for the rest of your life or whatever. I think that's a pretty dated way of doing things. And I'm sure there's a bunch of reasons why it is that, that case today. But it's really exciting that there are companies now that are existing, whether it's millennial grown or Gen Z grown, that realize that it's really about the experiences that you bring to the table and your skills. It doesn't matter what college you went to or what degree you got. So yeah.
So take me back to almost the cusp of graduating college, right? How were you thinking of your career at this point? Was it, that passion for that reusable, recyclable economy that, now you're involved in with Breeze? Or was it more, let me just go into sales and marketing and kind of see where my next steps are bit by bit?
So I'm still kind of, I'm at that edge of still graduating right now. So I'm there. As every person graduating, whether you have a startup or whether you have a part-time job or whatever it is, it's still an ambiguous road. There's so much left to learn. There's so many things that could happen. I was just talking to a friend today where, in your 20s, that year, it's not because you're the most free. It's not because you finally are an adult or you have some financial independency. It's because these are the years where you have all of these different decisions that can take your life into so many different paths. And so I think it's, no matter what you're doing when you graduate college, you're still going to have this, what the fuck am I doing? I don't know if I can swear, but yeah. What am I doing? What am I doing in the next 5 years, 2 years, 1 year? So it's sort of the same thing.
Yeah. And I think you touch on such a point that I honestly think every, going into college, coming out of college, 2 years out of college, whatever you may think of it, it's always that like, what the fuck am I doing moment?
Yeah.
And so what have you found? I mean, now you decided you're going to start a company, you have your own company. We'll get into that obviously, but what have you found that has helped you that you can maybe like tell others in that same boat who don't really know what's next?
Yeah, I think we all go through life thinking that once we get to this point, things will be so much clearer and things will be, and maybe, like when you are retired or if you have grandkids, maybe at that point it'll feel more like I'm just happy existing. But like at this point, you're just waiting for the clarity to come.
Yeah.
And it's always going to be uncomfortable. There's always going to be parts of your life where there's going to be uncomfortable. And then there's sometimes where you think you know what's going on and then you get hit with something else. So I think it's just following the signs of where am I most excited to go? Like, what is my most exciting next step? Is it to start a company? Is it to continue the company? Is it to jump onto this other company? Is it to go back to school? You know what I mean? Like, when you think about those things as an individual, there'll be feelings like the energy, excitement when it comes to certain things. I think it's just being aware of what exactly that is and maybe what the motivations are. Because sometimes, motivations towards those things might not be your authentic desires. It could be external, whatever goals or expectations that you think you should have that will get you there.
One thing that I have found, and you touched on it a bit basically, is it's so easy for us to just go with our everyday life, right? You wake up, you go to work, you come back, like it's a very, standard day to day. But in my mind, it's actually a very intentional process to see, okay, where am I getting energy from? Similar to what you said, like what parts am I coming out of this conversation feeling drained, or do I feel great? And then like, okay, continue down that. So I think that's something that at least like this tangible tool that you can use seems to be pretty useful, at least from what I understand.
No, 100%. And it's also the difficulty of being aware of that energy. You come out of a conversation and sometimes you're just like, why do I feel like shit?
Yeah.
And then sometimes you come out of the gym and you're like, I came here to feel good and now I feel like shit. Yeah. So it's like some days they'll be lifters and some days they won't be. And that's okay. It doesn't mean you have to X them out and do a completely new thing, but it's, it's just being aware of it.
So tell me about your experience about Madison Square Garden, working there. Because from my understanding, that was almost your first little hint of what there's a problem here and no one is solving it and I need to solve it.
At Madison Square Garden, I start my official on paper role was, helping service new customers or new season ticket members, as they would call it. And basically, how can we make their experience better and all of this stuff. And I think right before I started working there, I was chatting with just my group of people, my friends, just random ideas. We always talk about, just the aspects of life that we're existing in society and problems that are interesting, whether they're being solved or whether they're not being solved. So the idea of just single use and how we were using it and how we were using it over time kind of came up into conversation. And that was something that, that had been in the back of my head ever since that conversation. And then I went into Madison Square Garden and they would purchase like every other arena, like every other, sports or even beyond sports rewards or loyalty situation, these single use bullshit gifting items that they would just give to their customers. The customers would be like, oh, cool, for half a second. And then it would enter the stream of landfills and all of that. So I was in charge at one point of the procurement for these items and being able to either manage them or ideate new items for that. And ideate is a loose term because I was basically given a list of things that I could pick from to be able to give to these people. And all of them were just like shitty little, like flammable aprons or these like single use key or just things that I could just imagine them in the landfill for years upon years upon years past my grandchildren existing in. And so it grossed me out to my core. And so from there, I wanted to, I did a bunch of stuff with the internal teams there, the digital platforms teams, the service team, the sales team, to see if we could kind of create a more data forward solution that could allow the gifting process to be cooler and to figure out how we could bring those processes together to have more valuable, less, landfill filling items that would, benefit the company, benefit the end users, have a better experience. So I think that was sort of the first time I was implementing the idea of more of a sustainable system or process within, a big company like that.
In my mind, and to a fault, if that were happening and I was working there, right, I was in your shoes, I probably wouldn't be thinking the first thing is like, that's going to end up in a landfill. And this is absolutely ridiculous. In my mind, I'm like, okay, I don't think they'll like this gift, but we'll do it. Maybe. Where did that passion for, reusables and making sure we're in a sustainable climate and earth and, however you want to think of it, where did that stem, if you could pinpoint it?
I think, like, as I mentioned, it's sort of like a domino effect where I think that conversation that I mentioned, like right before I started, that just kind of sat in my brain was definitely an immediate direct catalyst to that. But I think one of my best friends who I, founded Breeze with, we have been friends for 5 years, and she studied environmental science at USC. And she's immediately, as soon as I met her, she was someone who was on it about recycling. She knew she led beach cleanups. And I was so disconnected from this world. I was that person that had no idea what was recycled, what the green bin meant, what the blue bin meant. I was just kind of like la-di-daing my way through just being a consumer, like consuming shit and then throwing it away and, living my life. And she was the type to like be at a party and, yell at someone for littering or doing whatever. And so I think as our friendship grew, there was an inevitable education that happened.
Yeah.
Where she would bully me, but like, obviously in a friendly bully of being like, this is how this works. Like, are you throwing that plastic away? Like there's a recycling bin right there. So I think that started, as I started to get re-educated and just being a little bit more aware step by step of how what I have in my hand that I purchased from the store now goes when I'm done with it. And so I definitely attribute that initial understanding and education not from the signage you see on school doors or the Chick-fil-A, whatever, but it's the people around me. And definitely Nicole was the first catalyst to that.
And what was that first moment where you realized, or like how long into Madison Square Garden were you like, okay, I think my work goes beyond just this and I need to actually make a bigger difference. How did that come about?
Yeah, I think there was maybe 3 months into it where I was like, it was an itch. Like I was itching, and it was in almost every conversation, especially with my best friend Nicole that I just mentioned. And we were just talking about like, why aren't solutions existing that have come to a point where this is fixed? Like, you think that you're born into the society that should just be perfect. Everything's working, everything's doing. And then as you get older and learn more things, you're like, there's a lot of imperfection happening here. There's a lot of inefficiency. How can we get it there? So I think that was the point in time. Yeah, 3 months in, at the very least, if not sooner, we were like, let's do it. It was a thought of let's try. Like, it's exciting, and we want to see where we can go with it.
I'm sure you heard this during this process, but many people advise, don't start a company with your friends or family or, and it could very much ruin that friendship, and a lot of things can happen that don't go how you expect. Did you think of that? Or at least how has that experience been starting with Nicole, as you mentioned?
I think, yes, of course. Everyone, especially if you're starting a business and you've kind of done some research or looked at any like YC, like YouTube videos or whatever it may be. I definitely was a parent. It was something that everyone was talking about. Don't go into business with your family. Don't go into business with your friends. And I think that rule stands for certain people. Like, you should just be aware there's some people you might not want to do business with, and that's fine. I think that business with anyone, starting something from the ground with anyone, will be hard. It will put a strain on any relationship, whether it's a stranger, whether it's your best friend, whether it's your mother, whoever it is. It will put you guys through some loops. And I think it's just up to, you or I or whoever to be honest, to be authentic, to be able to have a safe space. And sometimes that's not always the case. Sometimes your personal life will bleed into your work life, and your work life will bleed into your personal life. And yeah, it wasn't something we thought of too much going into it, but it's definitely something that we've talked about, as we've been in it. And it's definitely been tough, but it's also something where it's like, it's that much more gratifying when you can talk about where you were before and be able to share this huge timeline and this huge love for that person, going through the ups and downs of not just a personal relationship, but now like building a child, which is your work relationship and the business that you're building.
Were you able to stress test it in a sense beforehand? Or it seems like, as you mentioned, like you really just dove into it and said, we're both really passionate about it. And so if it was the latter, do you wish you had stress tested or at least done something differently?
So we've started a bunch of random shit in the past. And again, none of it was because we wanted to be an entrepreneur, because we wanted to start a company and that be our lives. But it was just because when there was something exciting to us, it wasn't like, should we? There was never like are we able to? It's like let's do it. Like, it's fun. We're excited about it. So we did like a volunteer program. We had hit up a while ago, back in even high school, the founder of Silly Bands to do to do a clothing brand X silly band situation. We had no procurement of thread material. Like we had no business pitching this idea. It was just a cool idea. And then, we got an email back and that never came about. You're welcome to society. But yeah, I mean, we've done many things together in the past that it was just sort of a no-brainer.
What do you think as a founder now, what is something that people rarely talk about that is very much apparent in your day-to-day or just journey as a founder?
I think obsession. I think obsession, and of course, this answer will be totally different. It might not resonate with everybody, but I think obsession on multiple accounts, like obsession over your idea, your business. I remember when I starting was just coming up with a plan and then talking to maybe some people, and that was our idea of like launching essentially. And so the obsession since that day, every single day, thinking about it. The first year, I don't think I could have a normal conversation with people, my friends, without it coming up. And it felt like I didn't even have any desire to talk about anything else, about my personal life. It was just this problem, this solution. And then the obsession that also comes, like once you get past that point, it's the obsession over results, or the obsession over how you want to be, maybe as a leader or as a person in this company. There's so much expectation of perfection that comes into this, because as an entrepreneur, you start at ground zero. You start at ground negative if you're raising. You start at ground zero, and so it's always like, how can I be better? How can I be more perfect? And it gets you. It's not always healthy. And so I think, yeah, that's one thing that people talk a lot about, product market fit. Once you get past that, the real conversation that happens in founders' heads is like obsession over yourself, your product, your team.
I think you're right. I think they all have it. And maybe if you don't, it's a bad thing, right? Like I think you have to be obsessed, but then it becomes, how do you manage that? And how do you do it in a healthy way? And so have you been able to almost have a healthy way? Like, are there avenues where you're able to force yourself to remove from Breeze for a bit, or how do you imagine that?
Today I say yes. Tomorrow or the next day or next week, the answer might be different. I know 2 weeks ago that was different. Yeah, I don't know. There's many different ways that you can manage that. I think on a personal level, therapy, depending on who you are. But I also think that if you're creating something from the ground up, there's no clocking in, clocking out. It's really on you. For a while there, in the beginning, I gave myself no time to exist personally, especially living in a studio in New York City. There's no one around you to say, hey, like, you've been on the screen for too long today. Like, you haven't seen the sunlight. Like, you're already vitamin D deficient in this city. Like, you should go outside. It was very much so like Nicole being like, like, I noticed that, like, you've been active, like, take a walk outside, do something. So I had that, which was great, like having people around you. But yeah, I think it's really having a good relationship with yourself and building that with yourself, and knowing, what your triggers are, or, when you're kind of teetering a line that, you should kind of pull back and redirect your attention to something more relaxing or not company focused. And the biggest thing is, like, don't identify yourself with what you're building. Of course, what you're building.
That's a hard thing. I totally agree. For those who are just listening, I just made quite the expression because that really resonates, right? But that's a hard thing to do. I think that applies in so many aspects of life. I could think of that, don't conflate your self-worth with, what you're doing with student athletes, in college playing sports. So that concept to me really resonates. But yeah, keep going. Keep going down that.
No, it's 100%. It's with whatever you do. And I was never one. I was always this, like, I'll do what I want to do in this moment. I could drop it, whatever. And then I really got into a point in my life where, like, I started to obsess and dedicate myself to things. And, Breeze was one of them. And I think it's so easy to identify, a company or a product or whatever you're building or doing as you. And if that fails, or if you quit that, then that's a part of you that dies or that failed. And I think, like, that thing, your performance in it, or the company or whatever you're building, will have an essence of your identity, but it shouldn't be your identity. You know what I mean? And I hear people say like detach emotion from business, and to an extent in places I do agree with that, but I think it's really tough. It's really tough thing to do because it's who you are. You're putting energy into it. I don't think that in a broad sense, that's realistic. I think you should always have a certain sense of emotion and personal interest and thought into what you're doing. But in the sense of your identity, I think being able to say, okay, I can look at this without it being a mirror. And if it needs to be cut off or it needs to go away or it needs to have something change, that's not you.
Yeah, no, I'm really, really happy you mentioned that. I think it's such a relevant topic regardless. Yes, especially for founders, but even outside of that. And I think I've seen even with my friends who are starting their own things, and I think it's so important even to step away because you don't think about it. You think that if you spend 24 hours a day, 7 days a week on this thing, it's going to be, successful. But actually, if you do like take that time for yourself, you work out, you go to therapy, whatever it may be, you actually can deliver way better results in a shorter amount of time.
100%. It feels like an easy math equation. You're like, this input will equal this greater output. But it's like, it's absolutely not that cut and dry. And you're totally right.
Gaia, what do you think is your superpower?
Being able to see where people are coming from. I think sometimes it might take a second or a breath to get there, but I do like to think that I do get there most of the time, eventually. So yeah, I think that's my superpower.
Yeah, I love it. And in my mind, I also translate that to empathy, right? And being able to step into their shoes and see where they're coming from. I love that. How do you define success, and how has that changed for you over the last 5 or so years?
I think everyone has, at least 5 years ago, me defined success as, getting a huge paycheck or being in a, yacht in France or whatever it may be. Just being comfortable financially was always the success. Having a position of power or being, financially comfortable. And I think now it's bringing something that I've worked on to someone else's life and seeing that positively change or affect that person's life.
Another question. What is your most high contrarian but high conviction opinion?
I think that a lot of people, before they start a company, or at least when they think about starting a company, they say, and this is people that I know and people that I've seen on the internet or whoever, they started at a corporation to get experience, or they want to get experience before they start a company. And I think depending on what you're doing, that's totally valuable. But I think as a principle, I don't agree with that. I don't think that, and I'm obviously biased because, that's my story, is just kind of going in heads first without much experience. But it's talking to my partner, for example, my life partner, he let me know that, the things that he's learned in his experience professionally is not what would lift him to be able to start a company from the ground up, that what every founder goes through, being able to write, do a pitch deck or go to investors or go to customers, and working in a corporation or having experience that is, non-startup doesn't mean that you will create a brilliant startup that will just become a $1 million success or affect people's lives positively. I think it really just matters, your personal experience, whether it is through school or it is through professional life, but mostly just like how you've grown up and the people you've been around, and then the enthusiasm and the obsession to solve that problem. Because at the end of the day, like, I didn't need any business degree for me to call up someone, who was using single-use waste and losing a lot of money from it, and saying like, hey, like, what solution do you want here? Like, what are your goals? I didn't need a business degree to do that. I just needed some motivation.
Yeah, I love that. And I almost want to ask you, because some people, it comes naturally to, and I feel like for you, it could, right? It comes naturally to say, yeah, I want to talk to this person. They're an expert in this space and whatnot. But maybe for those who it doesn't come naturally and it's more scary to do that, what can you help and tell those people? Because also, like, maybe they can't get an MBA and that's not the path for them either. But how do you get started then in that regard?
I mean, I think it's the same way that I kind of grew my comfort to doing that. And I think that was more so, again, not my decision. That was, my upbringing and really forcing myself to, okay, I'm at a new school or I'm in a new world, and I have to talk to new people and I have to get to know other people and give them my story. And the more experience that you have just talking to different people, the more you realize that people are typically the same at their core. It's not scary. It gets less scary to just drum up a conversation, and less scary to sound stupid. You know what I mean? People are so worried, and so, I mean, I still get, in my head about the things that I say post or pre, and it's just like, that'll never leave. People are like, just do it more and you'll never be afraid. No. You know what I mean? Like, you'll always overthink that, and that's just the human condition. But just doing it more will just get you a little bit more comfortable, every day.
Yeah. No, I love that. And I really like the point about at our core, we're all human. We all have the same basic needs. You could be the Elon Musks of the world. You could be, it doesn't matter. But at the end of the day, we all have very basic needs. So I like that a lot. And I mean, for me personally, that's a lot of SheLeads, right? This podcast has been cold emailing, reaching out, because worst case, you don't get a yes, and that's okay.
Exactly.
So I appreciate that. I think that's great. Okay, Gaia, last question for you. First of all, it's been such an honor. It's so great to have you on the show.
So much fun.
I appreciate it.
Of course.
So I know you mentioned it's quite easy and natural as a founder to become obsessed with what you're building. What are you obsessed about outside of Breeze that you think, another obsession that others are rarely talking about, or just in general? Yeah.
It's such an uneducated obsession. Like, it's just, I don't know. I since a young age, I mean, I already said it, I wanted to be an astronaut. When I realized, how much math, and also my fear of actually getting catapulted into the atmosphere and stratosphere and then space, that's definitely not going to happen for me until a few more billionaires go up there. But I'm just obsessed with space, more so, like, less so going to it. I'm happy to love it from a distance, but just, like, sometimes you forget. Like, we're like sitting on a call right now from different parts of the world on this planet, like on a rock, just like things are orbiting around us, but it's just like an infinite universe that surrounds us. Sometimes it can send you in an existential, like, fuck, I need to call my therapist. And sometimes it kind of is like an easer. It's like, wow, like, you get so stuck in your story, and just remembering that can kind of take you out of it a bit.
I love it. We're just little ants in the universe, really just little nothings. But I appreciate that. That's great. Well, Gaia, again, it's been so great. I've really enjoyed this chat. So thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been such a pleasure.
Thank you so much for listening to the show this week. If you enjoyed, please spread the word. Tell someone about SheLeads or post about it on social media and tag us. If you want to contact us, feel free to send over a message through the SheLeads Instagram page at sheleads.show. If you want to follow us on Twitter, our account is at SheLeadsShow, and mine is at Carly Malatsky. This episode was produced and edited by Nick Furshow. Thank you also to our partner, Floodgate. If you're passionate about startups and want to learn more about the starting journey of those who have built groundbreaking companies, I highly recommend listening to Starting Greatness with Mike Maples Jr., the founding partner of Floodgate. He has an incredible show that, in my opinion, is definitely worth your time. Thanks again.